You know what they don't want you to realize? That your power comes the moment you stop needing anything from them. That's when everything shifts. When you wake up one day and say, I don't care who walks out, I don't care who doubts me, I don't care who mocks me, because I know who I am and I'm not giving up. That's the beginning of power. That's where it all starts. Let me tell you something. Weak people are loud, desperate, emotional. Strong people, real strong people, they're calm. They don't panic. They don't chase. They don't cry when things don't go their way. You know why? Because deep down, they already want. You see, you win not when you get what you want, but when you no longer need it to feel complete. That's real winning. That's what they're terrified of. Look, you're going to have people betray you. You're going to have doors slam in your face. And yes, sometimes it feels like everything's against you, but hear me now. You never, ever give up. Not because you're desperate. No, you never give up because your mission matters, because you were sent here with something to finish. When people walk away from you, let them. When they lie about you, let them. When they say you're done, that you're finished, smile. Because that's when they show their cards. That's when their fear speaks louder than their mouths. And you don't respond. You don't fight small battles. You don't chase shadows. You stay focused on the vision that only you were given. That's power. That's discipline. That's divine authority. Let me tell you something very important. Detachment is not weakness, is not coldness, it's mastery. When you can walk through fire and not flinch, that's power. When you can sit in a room full of enemies and still speak with clarity, that's dominance. When your emotions don't own you, when your triggers are gone, when you don't respond to every insult, every rejection, every storm you have arrived. See, the crowd, they'll try to pull you in. They'll say, why aren't you reacting? Why don't you care? And you just smile because you know where you're going. You don't need applause. You don't need validation. You don't need anybody to understand, because the vision you carry is not from them. It's above them. It's bigger than them. You've been called, you've been chosen, and people who are chosen, they don't quit. You don't keep showing up because it's easy. You keep showing up because it's yours. This calling, this assignment, it has your name on it. And it doesn't matter who believes in it. It doesn't matter who doesn't. It doesn't even matter how hard it gets, because deep down, you've made a decision. I will not be moved. You're not here to impress anyone. You're not here to beg anyone. You're not here to cry over closed doors. You're here to dominate, to break through, to take ground, to win, and not just for yourself, but for every person who's been watching you in silence, waiting to see if you'll rise, waiting to see if you'll quit like everybody else or keep going like the few who finish what they start. I'll say this loud and clear. If it can shake you, it owns you. That's why emotional detachment is everything. That's why spiritual authority matters. You don't let emotions run your show. You don't let pain write your story. You don't let betrayal decide your future. You lead, you walk tall, you speak boldly, and you keep moving forward like the storm never touched you. Because you're not fighting for approval. You're fulfilling prophecy. You've got to reach a point where you say, I'm not leaving, I'm not breaking, I'm not bending, I'm not begging, I'm not begging, I'm not explaining, I'm not giving up. And you mean it, because people feel that. They feel when you've crossed the line where the old you is gone and the real you showed up, the version of you that's dangerous, not because you yell, but because you're silent, not because you chase, but because you don't have to. You've already made it through things that should have destroyed you. You've already walked through fire and kept going. Don't insult your future by bowing to temporary pain. Don't trade your crown for crumbs. Don't sell your calling for comfort. Rise, stand, hold the line. The moment you detach from what you thought you needed, everything that was meant for you starts chasing you. You never, ever give up. Not because you're stubborn, but because you know you were built for this. You know quitting was never an option. You know heaven has already cleared the way, and all you've got to do is walk. And when you walk, walk like you own the ground, because spiritually you do. Strength is not in reacting, but in refusing to be moved by noise. That's the difference between someone who rises and someone who crumbles. The world is loud. People scream for attention. Circumstances come at you fast. Insults, failures, setbacks, they shout in your face, daring you to respond. But real power is in silence. It's in stillness. It's in the decision not to be pulled into every fire, every distraction, every drama that tries to drag you off purpose. Anybody can react. That's easy. You get offended, you shout back. You get rejected, you chase after them. You get hurt, you start explaining yourself. It's not power, that's emotional slavery. That's a person who is being ruled by the external, not led by the internal. And the world wants that. The world wants you jumping at every shadow, explaining your worth, defending your name, responding to every low blow. But the moment you stop, the moment you say, I won't be moved by this, you step into a different category, a category few ever reach. They don't teach this kind of strength in school. You learn it in storms. You learn it when everything in you wants to scream, but you stay calm. You learn it when people betray you, lie to your face, and you don't flinch. You learn it when everything seems to be collapsing, and instead of panicking, you stay grounded. Because you know noise doesn't mean power, movement doesn't mean progress, and emotion doesn't mean truth. You start to realize something profound. Not everything deserves your energy. Not every battle deserves your sword. Some things exist to test your center, not to destroy it. And when you're anchored, spiritually anchored, you don't get tossed around by waves. You don't collapse every time someone disappoints you. You don't react every time someone doubts you. You rise calmly and keep going. That is strength. That is what terrifies people, because they can't control someone who isn't reacting. You become untouchable, not because things don't happen to you, but because they don't shake you. You built a foundation that's not built on opinions or emotions or outcomes. It's built on knowing who you are, knowing why you're here, knowing what matters and what doesn't. And once you know deeply, unshakably, most things lose their power to disturb you. That's when you become dangerous. Not when you scream, but when you no longer need to. Not when you fight back, but when your silence becomes louder than their noise. Not when you prove a point, but when you're so above it they fall silent on their own. That's real strength, the kind the world doesn't depict, the kind that changes atmospheres, the kind that keeps building when others break. Refuse to be moved. That's how you win. When you detach emotionally, you control the battlefield. That's the whole secret. The moment you stop tying your peace to people's behavior, to outcomes, to applause or acceptance, you stop bleeding energy. You start thinking clearly. You start seeing the game for what it really is. Most people are being played not because they're weak, but because they're too involved. They're too emotionally invested in things they don't control, and it clouds their judgment. But the one who steps back, the one who observes without reacting, that's the one who holds the real power. You can't fight a battle effectively when your emotions are scattered everywhere. You can't lead with strength if your sense of worth is tied to what happens today or what someone says about you tomorrow. And make no mistake, life is a war zone. You're dealing with critics, losses, pressure, delays, disappointment, betrayal. If you're reacting to everything, you're not in control. The world is, your enemy is. You're just a puppet on a string, dancing to whatever drama they decide to throw your way. But when you detach, when you stop taking things personally, you start operating from wisdom, not wounds. You stop rushing to defend yourself and start thinking strategically, because it's not about being numb. It's about being clear. It's about saying, I will not allow my peace, my purpose, or my progress to be hijacked by temporary emotions. That's just spiritual intelligence. That is high-level warfare. The person who can remain calm in the middle of chaos is the person who owns the field. Detach from needing validation. Detach from needing to be understood. Detach from needing immediate results. When you're emotionally detached, people can't bait you. They try to trigger you, provoke you, pull you down to their level, and they fail. Because you've elevated, you're playing a different game, and they hate that. They hate when they can't control your mood, when they can't predict your reaction, when they can't throw you off course with a few words. That's when they realize you're not the same. You start choosing your responses instead of reacting impulsively. You start leading the room without saying a word. You start seeing attacks as noise, not threats. And that shift, that internal shift, makes you untouchable. You don't need to win every argument because you already won your peace. You don't need to prove your value because you already know it. You're not moved by their chaos because you're rooted in clarity. That's control. That's authority. Emotional detachment isn't running away. It's standing firm while everything else tries to shake you. It's a refusal to let the external control the internal. The battlefield isn't outside, it's within. And if you can win there, everything else falls in place. Detach, not because you don't care, but because you care too much about what really matters to be distracted by what doesn't. That's how you take ground. That's how you win without ever raising your voice. You don't beg for approval when you know you're chosen. That's the truth they don't want you to understand. Because the second you realize you're chosen, truly chosen, you stop chasing people, applause and external validation. Something in you changes. You begin to walk different, think different, carry yourself with a level of certainty that can't be taught. It's not arrogance, it's alignment. You've come into agreement with your assignment. And once that happens, you no longer live on borrowed confidence. You move with authority because you know who you are. Most people are tired not because of hard work, but because they're begging for recognition, begging to be seen, heard, validated. They bend over backwards just to feel valuable for a moment. They tie their self-worth to someone else's opinion. One compliment makes them feel powerful. One rejection shatters them. That's a trap, because when your identity is built on approval, your peace is always in someone else's hands. You can't lead like that. You can't win like that. You become a servant to what was always meant to serve you opinion. But when you know you're chosen, you stop needing to be noticed. You stop explaining yourself. You stop watering yourself down so people can handle your presence. Being chosen means you were appointed for a time, a place, and a purpose that doesn't require permission. It's not up for vote. It's not up for debate. It's already settled. And when it's settled in your spirit, nobody can unsettle you in life. You don't get defensive when they doubt you. You don't get discouraged when they overlook you. You just keep moving forward because you weren't sent to be accepted. You were sent to impact. Chosen people understand rejection isn't personal, it's prophetic. Every closed door, every betrayal, every no you didn't expect, it's all part of the separation process. You're not supposed to fit in, you're not supposed to blend, you were never meant to walk like the crowd. And the minute you try to seek approval from those you were sent to rise above, you lose the very power that makes you different. You don't need everyone to believe in you, you only need to believe in the God who chose you. There's a quiet confidence that shows up in chosen people. They're not loud. They're not desperate. They're not chasing platforms. They're focused. They're precise. They're patient. They move when it's time and they don't apologize for it because they know destiny isn't something you apply for. It's something you answer. And when you've answered the call, you stop begging people to see your worth. You stop trying to convince those who are spiritually blind to recognize your vision. The moment you stop begging for approval and start owning your assignment, the game changes. You're no longer available for conversations that insult your calling. You're no longer shaken by silence. You're no longer waiting for someone to open a door that you were sent to break through. You know who you are. You know why you're here. And that knowing, that unshakable knowing, is all the approval you'll ever need. The moment you stop needing outcomes, you start commanding results. That's the paradox that most people never understand. They spend their lives chasing results, trying to force doors open, obsessing over outcomes, desperate for things to go a certain way. And because of that, they live in anxiety. They fear failure, they fear delay, and they fear rejection because their peace is wrapped in what they want to happen. But here's the truth. Power doesn't come from needing things to happen. It comes from knowing who you are, regardless of what does. When you stop needing something to validate you, it loses its control over you. And that's where true authority is born. You begin to attract results because you're no longer desperate for them. You begin to operate in flow, not for. You become the kind of person who walks into a room and shifts the atmosphere, not because you're demanding something, but because you carry the weight of someone who doesn't need anything. That's what's magnetic. That's what draws people in. That's what makes things move without you having to push. Needing is weakness. Needing blinds you. It makes you settle. It makes you shrink. It makes you say yes to things that insult your value. Just because you're afraid of not getting what you want, you stay in situations too long. You beg for what should be beneath you. You tolerate disrespect just to keep the deal, to keep the connection, to keep the appearance of progress. But when you stop needing, you begin choosing. You start standing. You walk away when things no longer serve your vision. You speak truth without fear of losing the room. And when you do that, the results come not because you chased them, but because you commanded them through your posture. Commanding results doesn't mean being aggressive. It means being aligned. It means you know that what's meant for you isn't fragile. You don't have to force the right door to open. You don't have to manipulate, impress, or hustle to exhaustion. When you've done your part, when you've prepared, when you've been faithful to the process, the rest flows to you. You become immovable, not because you're stubborn, but because your spirit isn't shaken by temporary outcome. When you live in detachment, you see clearly. You're no longer negotiating with fear. You're no longer reacting from lack. You're no longer moved by whether or not things happen on your timeline, your timeline. You trust the process. You stay rooted. And while others are panicking, you're building. While others are chasing, you're creating. And what you create through peace, through clarity, through conviction has a weight to it. That weight brings results. That weight opens doors. That weight draws resources. That weight makes room for you in places your striving never could. You don't beg for outcomes. You stand in truth. You walk in discipline. You show up consistently, boldly, fully, and then almost effortlessly, things begin to move in your favor. Not because you needed them, but because you became the person they were destined to follow. Spiritually strong people are silent when others scream. Not because they're weak, not because they're blind, but because they've mastered something most never will: restraint, discipline, clarity in chaos. While the world is loud, reactive, emotional, and constantly chasing the need to be right, the spiritually mature remain calm. They don't shout to be heard. They don't compete for attention. They don't panic when things go wrong. Their silence is not absence, it's authority. It's a language few understand, but everyone feels. The reason they don't scream back is because they're not operating from the same place as everyone else. They're not ruled by insecurity, ego, or fear. Their power isn't based on proving themselves. It's rooted in knowing themselves. You can't rattle someone who has nothing to prove. You can't provoke someone who already knows the outcome. You can't shake someone who's anchored in something greater than opinion. And that's what sets them apart. They've been through the noise, they've walked through the fire, and now they have no interest in playing the games people use to feel powerful. When people scream, when they lash out, when they fight to dominate a room, it's not strength, it's desperation. It's a performance, a distraction, a last attempt to look bigger than the fear inside. But silence, that's surgical, that's intention. It cuts through the noise without lifting a finger. It creates space. It makes people uncomfortable, not because it's empty, but because it reveals what screaming tries to hide: insecurity. Spiritually strong people don't respond to everything because they've outgrown the need to. They've developed a filter, a wisdom, a spiritual lens that lets them see beyond the surface. They don't just hear what's being said, they discern where it's coming from. And when they know the root is broken, they don't fight the fruit, they let it fall on its own. That's mastery, it's spiritual depth, that's strength without noise. You can tell how far someone has gone spiritually by how they respond under pressure. When betrayal comes, do they collapse or stand still? When accusations fly, do they panic or wait in wisdom? When everything's falling apart, do they scream or do they leave? The strongest people aren't always the loudest. In fact, they rarely are. They're the ones who can walk into a room full of chaos and still carry peace. They're the ones who can look at disaster and speak calm. They're the ones who, when others are losing their minds, gain clarity. Because true strength isn't about how high your voice goes, it's about how deep your roots are. And when you're rooted in truth, rooted in purpose, rooted in divine alignment, there's nothing anyone can say to shake you. You don't scream back because you're already secure. You don't argue because you've already won. You don't fight for the spotlight because your light shines even in silence. And that light, that stillness, that peace in the storm, it commands more respect than any shout ever could. The enemy wins when he gets your emotions. Don't give him the pleasure. That's how the battle is lost, not in the external, but within. The moment you let anger, fear, rejection, or desperation control your response, you've surrendered your authority. The enemy doesn't need to destroy you physically. He just needs to make you unstable emotionally. If he can trigger you, he can steer you. If he can agitate your spirit, he can cloud your judgment. And once your judgment is gone, your direction is lost. People think warfare looks like chaos on the outside. No, real warfare is invisible. It happens in the moments when you want to react, when everything in you wants to retaliate, when your emotions scream louder than your wisdom. That's when the enemy presses in, not with weapons, but with whispers. He pushes buttons. not walls. He doesn't break your life all at once. He simply nudges your emotions until you destroy it yourself with your words, your panic, your reaction. Your emotions are not your enemies, but they can be used against you. They're tools, not masters. The enemy knows he doesn't need to stop your destiny. He just needs to detour you long enough through discouragement, offense, pride, or distraction. And once your emotions start leading, your purpose takes the back seat. You begin making decisions from the wound instead of the vision. You start speaking from pain instead of purpose. And without even realizing it, you lose your power, not because you're weak, but because you gave it away. That's why emotional mastery is spiritual warfare. That's why silence is often louder than shouting. When you feel the attack and don't react, you disarm the enemy. When you're betrayed and don't seek revenge, you rise above his reach. When the world expects you to fall apart and instead you walk in peace, that's victory. You didn't just survive, you dominated. Not by force, but by discipline. Not by control over others, but by control over yourself. This is why he targets your heart, because your emotions are connected to your faith, your focus, your fire. If the enemy can get you doubting yourself, your assignment, your value, he can get you to quit before you even begin. If he can stir up your insecurities, he can blind you to your authority. That's the game. It's not always about destruction. Sometimes it's about distraction. He doesn't always need to shut the door. He just needs you emotional enough to miss the open one right in front of you. So protect your peace like it's sacred, because it is. Guard your heart like it's a throne, because it is. Stop giving your reactions to things beneath you. Stop letting temporary people trigger eternal callings. The moment you feel your emotions trying to take the wheel, pull back, pause, breathe. Remember who you are and whose you are. You're not here to react, you're here to rule. Don't give the enemy the pleasure of watching you self-destruct. Keep your crown, hold your ground, and walk forward unmoved. Winners walk away without flinching because their mission isn't up for debate. They don't waste time proving their worth, explaining their decisions, or defending their calling to people who were never assigned to understand it. When a person knows why they're here, what they carry, and what they've been called to build, they become immune to the noise. They don't argue. They don't panic. They don't stay in rooms where they're being tolerated. They walk away quietly and confidently, not because they lost, but because they've already won. And they know the battle isn't always worth the energy it takes to stay. People think walking away is weakness. No, it's power. It takes strength to leave what's familiar. It takes clarity to not engage with what distracts. When you walk away, not because you're afraid, but because you know your presence no longer serves the vision, you're operating in wisdom. You're not moved by emotion. You're not trying to win approval. You're governed by purpose. That kind of self-command is what sets true winners apart. They don't stay to prove a point. They leave to protect their assignment. When you understand your mission, everything else becomes small. Drama becomes small. Offense becomes small. Being misunderstood becomes small. You don't take it personally when people question you or attack you. You just recognize that their perspective is limited, and that's okay. You're not in this to be liked. You're in this to finish something, to build something, to shift something. And anything that doesn't align with that has to be left behind, no matter how long it's been in your life. Winners don't beg to be heard. They don't cling to toxic places or people hoping they'll change. They observe, they discern, and then they decide with stillness, with power, with unwavering focus. They understand that holding on to anything that threatens their peace, their clarity, or their discipline is too high a price to pay. So they walk, and they don't flinch because the mission isn't optional. The vision wasn't given to them to be debated. It was given to be fulfilled. There will be moments in your journey where you'll be tempted to stay somewhere just to prove you belong. But hear this, you don't have to prove what you've already been appointed to do. The call on your life doesn't need confirmation from the crowd. Sometimes your greatest strength will be in your exit, not your endurance. Sometimes walking away is the only way forward. And those who truly know their assignment understand when it's time to shift, not emotionally, but spiritually, with maturity, with certainty. You don't lose momentum when you walk away from things that no longer serve your destiny. You gain it. You reclaim your energy, your clarity, your authority. You stop negotiating with environments that drain you, and you start aligning with places that build you. Winners don't flinch, not because it's easy, but because they've already died to needing approval. They've buried the need to be understood. And in doing so, they rise undistracted, undefeated, and completely unstoppable. Detachment isn't apathy, it's dominance over distraction. People confuse the two all the time. They think that when you're not reacting, when you're not emotional, when you're not chasing or proving or explaining, that you don't care. But that's not true. It's not that you don't care. It's that you're focused. You've chosen not to be moved by things that don't matter. You've chosen to rise above noise and nonsense, not because you're numb, but because your purpose is too important to waste energy on what's beneath it. The world rewards those who chase every fire, respond to every opinion, and constantly stay involved. But those are the ones who burn out. They lose clarity. They lose direction. They get pulled in every direction, and they call it commitment. But commitment to distraction is still destruction. Detachment is the opposite. It is the refusal to give emotional access to everything that wants your attention. It's the wisdom to say, just because it's loud doesn't mean it's important. Just because it's urgent doesn't mean it's alive. Detachment is when you stop entertaining every argument. You stop taking everything personally. You stop justifying your calling to people who aren't even equipped to recognize it. You don't waste your words trying to fix perceptions because you understand that purpose is revealed through fruit, not explanations. You stop being addicted to being understood and you start being committed to being effective. That's power. That's dominance. Not over people, but over self, over your mind, over your peace, over your emotional economy. Dominance over distraction means you can sit in the middle of tension and stay calm. You can be surrounded by noise and still hear your inner voice clearly. It means you're not led by triggers, but by truth. You're not swayed by how you feel in the moment, but anchored in what you know deep in your spirit. Detachment protects your vision. It sharpens your focus. It builds your endurance. And it separates those who merely dream from those who actually finish. You can always tell who's mastered detachment. They move slower, speak less, and execute more. They don't seek attention. They don't chase validation. They don't follow the crowd. Their silence speaks louder than the noise around them. They've learned that most of the battles we fight are designed to distract us from the war we were born to win. And so they refuse to be baited. They refuse to be pulled into storms that aren't theirs. They understand that just because you can fight doesn't mean you should. The moment you stop responding to everything, we start responding to the right things. The moment you detach from the noise, the signal becomes clear. You remember who you are, why you're here, and what actually matters. And once you reach that point, you're dangerous, not because you're reckless, but because you're disciplined. You can't be baited, bribed, or broken. You're no longer chasing moments. You're building legacies. That clarity, that inner dominance, that's what makes detachment your greatest weapon. If it can shake you, it owns you. That's the test right there. Whatever still has the power to unsettle your spirit, control your reactions, or dictate your decisions, that thing owns a piece of you. It could be fear. It could be a person. It could be an outcome, a memory, or even a voice in your head. But if it still moves you off center, it still has authority over your peace. And that's not real freedom. It's bondage in disguise. You may look strong, but until you master your response, you're still living under someone else's influence. We're all being tested constantly, not just by events, but by pressure, by the unseen triggers, the unspoken insecurities, the quiet fears that live just beneath the surface. That's why the test isn't whether you win when things go your way, it's whether you stand when they don't. Because if your identity crumbles under pressure, then it was never rooted in truth to begin with. The storms don't break you. They reveal you, and if something has the power to shake you, it's only showing you where you haven't claimed full dominion yet. Think about it. The people who walk in unshakable peace aren't the ones who haven't faced storms. They're the ones who went through fire and learned to stop giving fire permission to define their future. They lost things, but didn't lose themselves. They heard the lies, but didn't let them live in their heads. They saw the betrayal, the rejection, the setback, but refused to bow to it. And because they stood still when everything around them was shaking, they gained access to a level of authority that no external force can take away. When you realize that your reaction is your responsibility, you stop blaming the storm. You stop saying they made me feel this or this happened, so I had to respond that way. No. You get your power back. You take ownership of your peace. You take ownership of your energy. And more than anything, you take ownership of your stability. You say, I may not control what comes at me, but I control what stays in me. And that shift, that decision breaks the hold of everything that used to rule you in secret. The enemy doesn't need to destroy your life to win. He just needs to keep you shaking. Shaking with anxiety, shaking with fear, shaking with doubt, because a shaking person can't build, a shaking person can't lead, a shaking person can't hear clearly, see clearly, or speak with conviction. But the moment you anchor yourself spiritually, emotionally, mentally, you become immovable. You become dangerous because now nothing owns you. Not praise, not rejection, not pressure, not lack, not delay. You walk through it all and you don't flinch. That's the goal, to become so rooted in truth, so aligned with purpose, so committed to inner mastery that nothing on the outside has permission to shake what God built on the inside. Because once you've mastered that, you're no longer controlled by outcomes. You're no longer owned by fear. You become free, and freedom, real freedom, can't be shaken. Never giving up isn't clinging. It's standing still like a rock in a storm. Most people think perseverance looks like holding on for dear life, panicking, begging, forcing things to happen. But that's not real endurance. Real endurance is calm, it's steady. It doesn't flail, it doesn't panic, it doesn't make noise for attention. It's the quiet, unshakable decision to remain exactly where you were placed, no matter what chaos surrounds you. When the winds scream, when the waves rise, when everything looks like it's falling apart, you stay planted. There's a kind of strength that comes when you decide that you will not be moved, not by people, not by timing, not by pressure, not by the illusion that it's taking too long. You learn that sometimes the greatest act of faith is not running, not forcing, not escaping, but remain just being there, still grounded, watching the storm pass while you refuse to collapse under it. Because storms don't last, but people who stand through them become different. They gain a depth, a clarity, a spiritual weight that only comes through stillness. See, giving up often disguises itself as movement. People leave things unfinished and call it strategy. They abandon purpose and call it wisdom. They walk away from what challenged them and call it peace. But in truth, it was just a clever escape because the mission got too heavy. The pressure got too real. The vision demanded too much sacrifice. But those who are called to finish don't run. They remain. They may be bruised, quiet, even doubted, but they don't move. And that alone is victory. Standing still doesn't mean being passive. It means being fully engaged without being desperate. It means trusting the timing even when you don't see the result. It means saying, I was called to this, and no matter how long it takes, no matter how dark it looks, I will not walk away. That kind of resolve cannot be taught in comfort. It's forged in adversity. When the delays are loud, when the breakthroughs are silent, when everyone else has left and you're still there, still believing, still building, still becoming. The rock in the storm isn't loud. It doesn't shout. It doesn't announce its stability. It just remains. And that's where the power is, because everything around it changes, but the rock doesn't. The people may change. The support may fade. The results may slow, but you stay, you hold the line, and not because you're stubborn, but because you're sent. And when you're sent, you don't move until the one who sent you says it's time. There's a deep reward for those who remain, a reward that quitters never see, a clarity the anxious never touch, a breakthrough that's reserved for those who endured the season without jumping ship. So don't confuse stillness with stagnation. Don't confuse silence with defeat. Never giving up doesn't always look like action. Sometimes it looks like a quiet, unshakable presence that simply refuses to break. You stand, you endure, you finish, and in that, you win. Every time. So hear this and let it settle deep in your spirit. The world doesn't need more noise, more panic, more people quitting halfway through the fire. It needs warriors, people who walk with divine clarity, who move with spiritual authority, who refuse to be owned by fear, distraction, or emotion. People who don't just talk about strength, but live it. The kind of strength that stays when others run, the kind that builds when others break, the kind that walks through storms untouched, unmoved, and absolutely unstoppable. Because in the end, it's not the loudest that win, it's the ones who never give up. Not because they're clinging to a dream in desperation, but because they know they were called to it. And what's been placed in you by divine design is not up for negotiation. So stay ground, be the rock in the storm, and let your unshakable presence remind the world that the strongest voice isn't always the one that yells, it's the one that refuses to be moved. Never give up, never give in, and never bow to anything less than what you were born to become.